This story is based on dark historical themes and contains descriptions of psychological abuse, fear, and mysterious disappearances. It is intended for mature audiences and for educational or storytelling purposes only. Some events are fictionalized for dramatic effect. Viewer or reader discretion is advised. Sister Isabella arrived at St. Mary's Convent on a gray morning, the mist curling around the hilltop like a shroud. She had been a novice in a smaller parish and dreamed of a life of piety, devotion, and service. The convent's towering walls and immaculate grounds seemed to promise exactly what she sought: safety, discipline, and a community of like-minded women dedicated to faith. Yet as she approached the heavy oak doors, a subtle unease coiled in her stomach. There was a quiet that felt unnatural, the kind of silence that seemed to listen. Upon entering, Isabella was greeted by Sister Agnes, a senior nun whose expression was polite but guarded. Her eyes, dark and unyielding, examined Isabella with a scrutiny that felt almost accusatory. "Welcome to St. Mary's," she said, voice soft but precise. "We are pleased to receive a new sister. You must remember to follow the rules at all times. Deviations are discouraged." There was an unspoken weight to the words, a tension Isabella could not yet identify. Isabella was shown to her room, a small cell with stone walls, a narrow bed, and a single candle. The furnishings were austere but orderly, in keeping with the convent's strict regimen. She unpacked her modest belongings, noting the absence of any personal touches or comfort. The rules of St. Mary's were simple yet rigid. No questions during prayers, no movement without purpose, no speaking unless permitted, and an expectation of unquestioning obedience. It was discipline, yes, but the intensity felt suffocating. Her first days at the convent were filled with observation. Isabella noticed the peculiar behaviors of the senior nuns. They moved silently through the halls, their eyes never lingering on one object for too long. Whispers were exchanged behind closed doors, quickly hushed when she approached. At meals, the sisters ate in silence, glancing nervously at one another. The older nuns seemed tense, as though any misstep could invoke punishment far beyond reprimand. Isabella felt a chill in the air, a sense that the convent itself was alive, watching, and judging her every movement. On her third day, Isabella noticed the first subtle absence. Sister Margaret, a nun who had been welcoming during her arrival, did not appear for prayers. She asked another sister about her, and the answer was vague. "She is attending to private matters." The phrase struck Isabella as odd. Private matters in a convent where privacy was minimal meant something else, something the senior nuns did not wish to disclose. She filed the thought away, unsure if she was imagining danger or sensing the first sign of something deeply wrong. The atmosphere grew more oppressive as she observed interactions among the nuns. The senior sisters wielded authority with chilling precision. A glance, a whispered admonition, or the silent withdrawal of approval could control behavior more effectively than any spoken threat. Isabella noted how the newer nuns seemed fearful yet obedient, their spirits dampened, their personalities muted. It was as if the convent consumed individuality, molding every woman into a uniform reflection of fear and conformity. One evening, Isabella attempted to explore the upper floors, seeking to understand the layout of the convent. As she passed a long corridor, she caught a glimpse of a door slightly ajar. From within came the faint sound of muffled sobbing. She hesitated, her heart pounding, but curiosity and concern compelled her to linger outside. The noise stopped abruptly when a shadow passed across the doorway. She knocked lightly, and the voice of a senior nun called sharply, "Return to your quarters. This is no place for wandering eyes." Isabella obeyed, but the image of that fleeting moment, the cry, the shadow, the door closed too quickly, haunted her sleep that night. Her suspicions grew as days passed. Sisters she had greeted warmly vanished without explanation. Some returned, pale and quiet, avoiding eye contact. Others never returned, their absence ignored as if it were expected or inconsequential. Isabella began to note the patterns, whispering with the few new nuns she could trust. They shared fears in hushed tones. Rumors of hidden chambers, of punishments so severe that even mentioning them could invite retaliation. The young novices were trapped in a web of secrecy, fear, and silence. Despite the growing dread, Isabella could not allow herself to succumb to despair. She resolved to observe carefully, remembering her purpose, devotion and service. But service, she realized, at St. Mary's, meant obedience to a system designed to suppress, control, and conceal. Every ritual, every rule, every quiet glance was a reminder that the convent was not the sanctuary it claimed to be. The walls that promised sanctuary instead imprisoned minds and spirits. By the end of her first month, Isabella had uncovered the first real clue to the convent's darkness. She noticed a staircase leading to the sublevels, normally hidden behind heavy curtains and locked doors. During a moment when the hallways were empty, she saw a flicker of movement in the shadows below. A muffled voice, pleading, or perhaps crying, rose from the darkness. Isabella's pulse quickened. It was then that she understood. The disappearances were not accidental. Something deliberate, sinister, and horrifying lay hidden within St. Mary's, and she had just glimpsed the first evidence. From that moment, Isabella's life transformed. Her devotion to faith remained, but her instinct to survive and protect became paramount. She began to form cautious alliances with other novices, observing the convent's secretive routines, documenting anomalies in her mind, and silently preparing for what she now understood was inevitable: the uncovering of St. Mary's most terrible secrets. As the days turned into weeks at St. Mary's, the pattern of disappearances became undeniable. Sister Isabella, once naive and hopeful, now felt the heavy weight of unease pressing upon her. Each missing nun left a void in the convent, a silence that was more telling than words ever could be. The older sisters never explained their absence. They merely continued their duties as though nothing had changed. But Isabella noticed the nervous glances, the hushed whispers, and the locked doors that had suddenly become even more impenetrable. It started subtly. Sister Margaret, who had guided Isabella during her early days, failed to appear for morning prayers. When Isabella inquired, a senior nun simply said, "She is engaged in her spiritual duties elsewhere. Focus on your own path, child." The explanation felt hollow, but questioning it was dangerous. Isabella began to keep careful notes in her mind, cataloging the missing sisters, their last known movements, and the peculiar reactions of those remaining. Soon, more disappearances followed. Sister Beatrice, quiet and studious, vanished one night. Her small, candlelit cell was found empty, her belongings neatly folded on her bed. The senior nuns dismissed the incident with a casual nod, insisting that Sister Beatrice had been called away to assist with special tasks of devotion. The phrase, once reassuring, now carried a sinister undertone. Isabella's suspicions deepened. These were not ordinary absences. There was a method, a pattern, and perhaps a purpose no one dared speak aloud. The convent atmosphere grew increasingly oppressive. Those who remained were forced to participate in rituals and chores with meticulous obedience, all while the knowledge of the missing sisters hung over their heads like a cloud. Even simple acts of kindness were watched and punished. A new novice who accidentally dropped a candle or misaligned a chair might receive a cold stare, a whispered warning, or a night spent in isolation. Fear became the language of survival. Isabella began noticing subtle signs pointing to hidden chambers and secret passages. Footsteps echoing behind locked doors, doors that rattled as if something or someone was trapped within, and occasional muffled cries that sent shivers down her spine. She shared her concerns with a small group of novices she could trust, each of them equally fearful yet increasingly determined to understand the truth. Together, they began to map the convent, observing routines, timing movements, and watching the senior nuns for signs of their hidden activities. One night, while performing her duties in the candlelit hallways, Isabella heard a faint voice, a whisper, barely audible, calling her name. She froze, straining her ears. The voice was soft, distant, yet insistent. Following the sound cautiously, she found herself outside a rarely used corridor. Behind a locked door, the whispers grew stronger. She could make out fragments of speech. Cries of distress, pleas for help, even the subtle sound of chains rattling. Her heart pounded. This was no ordinary convent. Some sisters were being confined, and perhaps worse, tortured or hidden. The senior nuns' control was absolute. They maintained outward appearances for visitors and correspondents, ensuring no suspicion from the outside world. Letters from the convent painted an idyllic picture of devotion and discipline, but the reality inside was far darker. Isabella and her small group of allies began to piece together a grim pattern. The sisters who disappeared were not gone for spiritual work. They were being silenced, hidden, or punished in secret chambers. Tension in the convent escalated. Some novices began to experience subtle punishments for asking questions or showing curiosity. Lights flickered mysteriously, footsteps followed where none should be, and whispered threats suggested that any attempt to uncover the truth could result in disappearance or worse. Isabella realized that survival required not only vigilance but also cunning. She began noting the movements of the senior nuns, identifying patterns, and quietly searching for clues in areas previously thought off-limits. Despite the fear, bonds of solidarity began to form among the novices. They shared whispered conversations in the dead of night, comforting one another and strategizing ways to uncover the truth. Each disappearance fueled their determination. They understood that understanding the scope of the horror was the first step toward survival, and perhaps eventual escape. The fear of disappearance became an unspoken reality for every nun. Walks in the garden, candlelit prayers, and even routine cleaning carried an underlying terror. Any misstep might draw the attention of the senior nuns, leading to confinement or disappearance. The convent, once seen as a sanctuary of faith and devotion, had transformed into a labyrinth of fear, control, and secrecy. By the end of the first month of these mysterious disappearances, Isabella and her allies were certain of the truth. St. Mary's was not a holy refuge but a prison. The missing nuns were being held, punished, or worse, in hidden parts of the convent. The novices' challenge was now clear. Uncover the hidden horrors without drawing attention, protect one another, and prepare for the moment when the truth could no longer remain buried. By the second month of her stay at St. Mary's, Sister Isabella had begun to understand the chilling reality of the convent. What had initially seemed like rigid discipline now revealed itself as a carefully orchestrated system of control, fear, and concealment. The disappearances were no accident. They were a symptom of a much darker practice hidden beneath the convent's pristine facade. The walls, once comforting in their stone solidity, now felt like a prison. Every echo, every shadow, and every locked door was a reminder of the horror that lay hidden within. It began with small discoveries. Isabella noticed strange markings on walls near the upper corridors, patterns of scratches and etchings that suggested someone had tried to escape or communicate. She discovered hidden compartments in the linen closets and beneath the chapel floors. Faint, almost imperceptible noises, chains, whispers, muffled sobs, emanated from places that no novice had reason to enter. Each clue painted a grim picture. Nuns were being confined in secret, their suffering silenced by fear and ritualized obedience. The senior nuns, who wielded authority with chilling efficiency, maintained outward appearances for the unsuspecting. To outsiders, St. Mary's appeared devout and serene, but inside, they ruled through intimidation, punishment, and isolation. Isabella realized that the convent operated like a small, self-contained world where every action was monitored, every question suppressed, and any dissent was met with immediate reprisal. The disappeared sisters had likely fallen victim to this system, their lives erased or hidden from view. Isabella's growing awareness led her to form a cautious alliance with 3 other novices: Sister Catherine, Sister Margaret, and Sister Anne. Each had noticed the anomalies but had been too frightened to investigate alone. Together, they began to explore areas previously off-limits, searching for signs of the missing sisters. Their initial efforts were tentative, with each creaking floorboard and flickering candle threatening to reveal their activities. Yet their courage grew as they shared whispered observations and pieced together the pattern of terror. Their investigations led to the discovery of a narrow staircase behind the convent's library, concealed by a heavy tapestry. Descending cautiously, they found a corridor lined with locked doors. From within came muffled sounds, crying, scratching, even faint whispers of prayer. Isabella's heart pounded as she realized the magnitude of the horror. Behind each door was a sister imprisoned, isolated, and possibly subjected to punishment or torture. The convent's senior nuns were not merely strict, they were actively engaging in acts of psychological and physical cruelty. The group observed that the punishments were both calculated and ritualized. Some doors led to small cells where nuns were confined for days, given only minimal food or water, and forbidden from speaking. Others appeared to be chambers for discipline or interrogation, designed to instill terror and submission. The novices realized that the convent had created a system where fear was a tool, obedience was absolute, and secrecy was paramount. Any hint of resistance or curiosity could lead to immediate disappearance. As they explored further, Isabella and her allies uncovered evidence of long-term confinement. Journals with scratched notes hidden in floorboards, discarded rosaries, and scraps of clothing belonging to missing sisters. The faint smell of decay and neglect hung in the air, a silent testament to years of cruelty. Each discovery heightened the group's resolve. They could no longer ignore the truth. St. Mary's was a prison masquerading as a sanctuary, and the missing nuns were victims of a meticulously maintained system of oppression. The psychological impact on the survivors became clear. Fear was pervasive, self-expression forbidden, and individuality erased. Those who had endured confinement often returned physically unharmed but emotionally shattered, compliant in every way to avoid further punishment. The novices understood that uncovering these horrors was not enough. They needed to plan carefully if they hoped to protect themselves and others. Despite the growing danger, Isabella refused to succumb to despair. The discovery of the hidden horrors ignited a fierce determination in her and her allies. They began cataloging observations, noting the patterns of punishment, and preparing for a moment when they could confront or escape the oppressive control of the senior nuns. Every whispered observation, every careful movement in the shadowed corridors, became part of their plan. The hidden horrors of St. Mary's were no longer rumors. They were tangible, undeniable, and terrifying. The convent's serene exterior had masked years of cruelty, fear, and psychological manipulation. Isabella and her companions faced the sobering reality. They were now part of a battle for survival within walls that promised sanctuary but delivered terror. Their courage, resilience, and careful planning would determine whether they became victims or survivors, and the fate of the missing nuns hung in the balance. The discovery of the hidden chambers transformed Sister Isabella and her small circle of allies from fearful novices into determined conspirators. They knew that survival depended not only on careful observation but also on cooperation. Alone, any attempt to uncover the full scope of the horrors of St. Mary's would have been suicidal. Together, however, they began to form a secret alliance, bound by shared fear and a growing sense of moral obligation. The alliance was tenuous at first. Each member was acutely aware that even a single misstep could result in punishment, disappearance, or worse. Trust was difficult to establish. Years of indoctrination had taught the novices to fear the very sisters who shared their lives. But Isabella, with her keen observation and steady determination, managed to inspire confidence. She shared her discoveries cautiously, hinting at locked corridors, hidden chambers, and the muffled cries that had first revealed the convent's dark secret. Sister Catherine, known for her intelligence and curiosity, contributed by mapping the convent. Every hallway, staircase, and locked door was noted, and patterns of activity were recorded. They discovered that the senior nuns maintained strict schedules, allowing only brief windows when the corridors were empty. During these moments, the Alliance could observe without being detected, gathering information crucial to understanding the full scope of the abuse. Sister Margaret and Sister Anne, quieter and more cautious, became the eyes and ears of the group. They monitored the senior nuns, noting routines, the times doors were unlocked, and the locations where whispers of punishment originated. Every detail was meticulously memorized. They devised a system of signals, small gestures, shifted candles, and subtle knocks that allowed them to communicate silently while avoiding detection. The stakes were high, and any miscommunication could lead to catastrophe. The Alliance also began providing small forms of comfort and protection to the more vulnerable nuns. When a sister returned from confinement, pale and shivering, Isabella and her allies would secretly bring extra blankets, small morsels of food, or whispered words of reassurance. These acts were dangerous but necessary. They kept hope alive and reminded the imprisoned sisters that someone still cared. In this way, the Alliance became not only a network for gathering information but also a lifeline for those suffering in silence. Over time, the novices discovered evidence of the full extent of the senior nuns' cruelty. Journals and scraps of parchment hidden in floorboards and behind altars detailed punishments, confinements, and instructions for maintaining secrecy. They learned that the disappearances were not random. They were a calculated system of control, designed to instill terror, obedience, and silence. The senior nuns maintained absolute authority, ensuring that no one dared question their actions. Despite the danger, the secret alliance devised plans for exposing the horrors of St. Mary's. Their approach was cautious. Direct confrontation was impossible without endangering everyone. Instead, they focused on gathering evidence, documenting the conditions of the hidden chambers, and keeping track of which sisters had disappeared or returned. Isabella realized that patience and precision were their only means of survival, as any rash move could trigger punishment or force the senior nuns to tighten their grip even further. The Alliance also provided emotional support. Each member faced profound fear, knowing the consequences of discovery could be deadly. They shared whispered encouragements during prayers, offered subtle gestures of solidarity, and maintained a quiet morale that kept despair at bay. It was a fragile lifeline, but it gave them the courage to continue observing, recording, and planning. The months passed, and the secret alliance grew more confident. They discovered hidden passageways connecting the upper and lower levels of the convent, corridors that led directly to the chambers of the disappeared nuns. Each discovery brought horror, but also clarity. The group now understood the scale of the atrocities. They were no longer just witnessing a few disappearances. They were observing a systematic imprisonment and abuse of the convent's sisters. By the end of the year, the Alliance had achieved a remarkable feat. They had mapped nearly the entire convent, documented routines, and gathered evidence of the hidden horrors. The secret network had become the only barrier between the innocent novices and the oppressive power of the senior nuns. Isabella and her allies realized that they were not only fighting for their own survival but also for the freedom and safety of every sister who had been or could be confined. In the shadows of St. Mary's, the secret alliance had become a force of quiet resistance. It was a fragile yet unbreakable chain of courage, compassion, and determination. They understood that exposing the truth would require patience, courage, and careful planning, but they were ready. The horrors of the convent could no longer remain hidden, and the alliance represented the first glimmer of hope that justice, or at least freedom, might one day prevail. The culmination of months of careful observation and cautious exploration arrived unexpectedly one stormy evening. Sister Isabella and her secret alliance had learned the convent's rhythms, the precise timing of the senior nuns' rounds, and the narrow windows when they could move unseen. That night, with lightning flashing across the darkened corridors, the novices descended the hidden staircase behind the library, hearts pounding, breath shallow, and hands trembling. At the base of the stairs lay a long, narrow corridor, dimly lit by flickering candles mounted in rusted sconces. Doors lined either side, each locked with heavy iron keys that seemed to have been forged for secrecy and punishment alike. From behind one of these doors came a faint, pitiful sobbing. The novices exchanged silent glances, realizing that the moment of truth had arrived. They were about to uncover the full horrors that had haunted St. Mary's for years. Isabella motioned for the others to follow her, and they moved cautiously, listening intently. Another door rattled slightly as if something inside had shifted. The whispers grew audible now, pleading and fearful. Isabella felt a chill crawl up her spine. They had expected cruelty, confinement, perhaps even threats, but the reality before them surpassed their worst imaginings. This was systematic imprisonment, a deliberate, cruel structure designed to break spirits and suppress individuality. They discovered the first cell, its iron door partially ajar. Inside lay a young nun, barely conscious, curled in a corner. Her thin frame, pale skin, and hollow eyes spoke of weeks of neglect. She flinched at their approach, fearing punishment. Isabella knelt beside her, whispering soothing words, offering reassurance that help had arrived. The other novices followed, opening more doors to reveal sisters of all ages, some in chains, others kneeling silently in fear. Each sight was more harrowing than the last, confirming the horrifying reality. The senior nuns had imprisoned multiple sisters, isolating them, and using terror to maintain absolute control. The hidden chambers were labyrinthine, extending beneath the convent like a shadow world. Every corner contained evidence of neglect and cruelty. Straw-strewn floors, discarded rosaries, scraps of clothing, and faint stains hinting at deprivation. Some rooms appeared to be intended for punishment. Small, confined spaces where a sister could be held for days, deprived of food or water, her spirit broken by solitude. Others contained subtle tools of intimidation, objects meant to instill fear rather than inflict direct physical harm. The arrangement was calculated, methodical, and utterly chilling. As Isabella and her allies explored further, they uncovered written evidence of the convent's dark practices. Journals, notes, and coded messages hidden behind bricks revealed how the senior nuns had maintained secrecy, documented disappearances, and rationalized their cruelty in the name of devotion. The sophistication of the system was terrifying. It was not the work of a few rogue individuals but a deliberate, institutionalized hierarchy built to oppress and silence. The discovery shook the novices to their core. Fear mingled with resolve as they realized the magnitude of their responsibility. These sisters were not simply victims. They were witnesses to a structure of cruelty that could extend indefinitely if left unchecked. The hidden horrors of St. Mary's were no longer rumors, no longer whispered fears. They were undeniable, tangible, and horrifyingly real. Yet even in the face of such darkness, Isabella felt a spark of hope. She saw the eyes of the imprisoned sisters light up, faintly, at the sight of their rescuers. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, these women felt the possibility of safety, compassion, and solidarity. The secret alliance had not only discovered the horrors, but had also provided a lifeline, however fragile, for those who had suffered in silence. The discovery transformed fear into determination. Isabella understood that this evidence, both physical and documented, could one day expose St. Mary's, bring justice to the victims, and prevent future abuses. It was the first step toward reclaiming the convent from its oppressive rulers, a crucial victory in the long struggle for survival, truth, and justice. With the full scale of the convent's horrors laid bare, Sister Isabella and her secret alliance faced a daunting decision: escape under the cover of night or attempt to confront the senior nuns and demand an end to the cruelty. The risks were immense. Any misstep could result in immediate punishment, recapture of the imprisoned sisters, or even death. Yet, the thought of leaving the suffering sisters behind was unbearable. They realized that careful planning, courage, and unity were the only paths to survival and justice. The first step was communication. Isabella and her allies whispered instructions to the newly freed sisters, teaching them how to move quietly, avoid detection, and respond if confronted. Each woman carried the weight of fear, but also the spark of hope. The alliance knew that the senior nuns' control relied on isolation and silence. By moving together, they could minimize exposure and maximize their chance of escape. Every corridor, every staircase, and every door had been memorized during weeks of secret observation. They chose a night when a storm raged outside, lightning illuminating the convent grounds and rain masking the sounds of movement. The wind battered the walls, providing a natural cover for footsteps and whispers. The group moved in small clusters, navigating narrow corridors, unlocking doors, and guiding the imprisoned sisters to safer passageways. The tension was palpable. Every creaking floorboard or distant shout sent hearts racing. Silence was maintained through gestures and subtle signals, honed through months of practice. Confrontation became inevitable when a senior nun unexpectedly appeared at the top of the staircase. Isabella's heart skipped, but years of fear had honed her courage. With steady voices, the alliance challenged the nun, demanding the release of all imprisoned sisters. The confrontation was brief and tense. The senior nun, taken aback by the organized defiance and the knowledge that outsiders might soon learn the truth, hesitated. In that critical moment, the alliance seized control, guiding the sisters past her and down the hidden corridors toward freedom. The escape was perilous. Storm-soaked gardens, high walls, and locked gates presented obstacles, but careful preparation allowed the group to move undetected. By the first light of dawn, the sisters emerged from the convent, wet, exhausted, but free. Their relief was profound, mingled with grief for those who might have remained trapped. The storm, once an ominous force, became their ally, washing away the fear that had defined their lives within St. Mary's walls. The successful escape marked a turning point. It was not just a physical liberation, but an assertion of agency and courage in the face of systemic cruelty. The alliance had transformed fear into action, secrecy into strategy, and despair into hope. For the first time in months, the nuns could envision a life beyond the shadowed halls, a life defined by choice, dignity, and freedom. The escape from St. Mary's marked the beginning of a long and difficult journey for Sister Isabella and the other survivors. Once free, they sought safety and support from local authorities and sympathetic clergy who had long suspected that something was amiss within the convent's walls. The horrors they described, the hidden chambers, the systematic punishment, and the disappearances, shocked the community. Many could not reconcile the image of St. Mary's as a sanctuary with the reality of cruelty and oppression that the nuns had endured. Investigations followed swiftly. Authorities, accompanied by medical professionals and clergy, entered the convent to uncover the truth. The hidden chambers, the evidence of confinement, and the documentation the survivors had noted were revealed to the public. Each discovery reinforced the testimonies of the escapees, providing undeniable proof of the abuse that had been inflicted for years. The senior nuns were held accountable, facing legal proceedings and public condemnation for their actions. It was one of the first widely recognized cases of institutionalized abuse within a religious setting, sparking debate and reflection across the region. The survivors faced a different kind of challenge. Beyond the immediate trauma of captivity, they had to confront the psychological scars that years of fear, isolation, and oppression had left behind. Counseling, spiritual guidance, and the support of one another became essential to their healing. Many slowly regained a sense of autonomy and dignity, though memories of the convent's horrors lingered, a permanent reminder of what they had endured. The experience left them both vulnerable and resilient, shaping the rest of their lives. The legacy of St. Mary's extended beyond the survivors. News of the convent's horrors prompted reforms in religious institutions and heightened awareness of the need for oversight and accountability. Local authorities, clergy, and communities became more vigilant, ensuring that institutions entrusted with the care and spiritual guidance of individuals, especially vulnerable novices, were subject to scrutiny. St. Mary's became a cautionary tale, demonstrating the danger of unchecked power, secrecy, and blind obedience. For Sister Isabella and her allies, the experience left an enduring mark. They dedicated themselves to advocacy, education, and the protection of vulnerable individuals. Their courage in exposing the horrors of St. Mary's became an inspiration, a testament to resilience, solidarity, and the power of collective action against oppression. They ensured that the voices of the silenced nuns were heard, and that the lessons learned from their ordeal would not be forgotten. Ultimately, St. Mary's Convent became synonymous with both cruelty and survival. It served as a grim reminder that appearances can be deceiving, that institutions are not inherently virtuous, and that courage, solidarity, and vigilance are essential to protect the innocent. The story of the nuns who disappeared, and of those who survived to expose the truth, remains a haunting chapter in history, a powerful lesson on the human spirit's capacity to endure, resist, and triumph even in the darkest of places.